I had been married to Graham Mercer for 18 years. 18 years is a very long time to build a life with someone. We met when I was 34 and he was 39. We didn't have the chaotic, fiery romance of a high school drama. We had a mature, deeply grounded partnership. We respected each other's space, we supported each other's careers, and we never went to sleep angry. Or so I believed. When we got married, Graham came with a 10-year-old daughter named Vanessa from his previous marriage. I never tried to replace her mother. I never overstepped my bounds. I was polite, supportive, and completely accommodating. I paid for her summer camps. I drove her to soccer practice when her mother was busy. I baked her birthday cakes. I thought we had a solid, respectful blended family. I thought Graham and I were an unbreakable team. I was entirely, catastrophically wrong. The fracture didn't start with a massive argument or a shocking discovery of infidelity. It started with the doorbell ringing at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night. I was 52. I was already in bed, wearing my comfortable silk pajamas, reading a novel under the warm glow of the bedside lamp. Graham was in the bathroom, brushing his teeth. When the doorbell chimed, a sharp, echoing sound in the quiet house, I frowned. We lived in a quiet, incredibly safe, affluent suburb. Nobody visits at 11 o'clock at night unless there is a severe emergency. I put my book down, tied my robe around my waist, and walked downstairs. Graham followed closely behind me, wiping toothpaste from his mouth, looking equally confused. I unlocked the heavy front door and pulled it open. Standing on the front porch was Vanessa. She was 28 now, beautiful, highly fashion-conscious, and currently wearing a deeply irritated expression. Standing right next to her was her husband of 2 years, Cole Bennett. Cole was 30, worked in mid-level corporate sales, and always looked slightly bored. Surrounding them on the porch were 4 massive, incredibly heavy-looking suitcases and 2 large cardboard boxes. "Vanessa?" I asked, my voice heavy with confusion, pulling the door open wider. "Is everything okay? What are you doing here so late? Why do you have all your luggage?" Vanessa didn't answer my question. She didn't say hello. She didn't apologize for waking us up. She simply grabbed the handle of her largest suitcase, pushed past me into the foyer, and dropped the bag onto the hardwood floor with a loud, heavy thud. Cole followed her inside, carrying the boxes, completely ignoring me. "We lost the lease on our apartment," Vanessa announced, kicking off her expensive designer shoes, walking into my living room as if she were checking into a hotel. "The landlord sold the building. We need a place to stay while we look for a house to buy. Dad said we're moving in." I froze. I turned my head very slowly and looked at Graham. "Dad said we're moving in." Graham was suddenly looking intensely at the intricate pattern of the Persian rug in the foyer. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He shifted his weight uncomfortably, his hands stuffed deep into the pockets of his sweatpants. He had known. He had agreed to let his adult daughter and her husband move into our house, indefinitely, with all of their belongings, and he hadn't said a single word to me about it. "Graham?" I asked quietly, keeping my voice incredibly level, though my heart was beginning to beat a frantic, angry rhythm against my ribs. "You told Vanessa she could move in?" "It's just for a little while, Eloise," Graham mumbled, his voice defensive and weak. He still wouldn't look at me. They were in a tough spot. Their family. I couldn't just leave them out on the street. Before I could respond, before I could ask why he hadn't consulted the woman he had been married to for 18 years, about doubling the population of our household, Vanessa walked back into the foyer. "Oh, right," Vanessa said, reaching into her expensive leather handbag. "Before I forget." She pulled out a single, folded sheet of heavily embossed stationery paper and shoved it directly into my hand. "Since we're going to be living here for a while," Vanessa said, her voice dripping with an arrogant, deeply condescending authority, "Cole and I have a few specific routines. We work highly demanding jobs, so we need things to run smoothly in the mornings." I looked down at the paper. It was a handwritten list. 1. Breakfast needs to be ready by 6 a.m. sharp. No fried foods. Only organic eggs and fresh fruit. 2. The bed linens in the guest room need to be changed every Sunday morning. We prefer high thread count white cotton. 3. The guest bathroom must be wiped down and restocked every evening. 4. Cole's work shirts and my silk blouses cannot go in the dryer. Hand wash only. They must be ironed, hung on wooden hangers, and never folded. I stared at the list. I read it twice, genuinely believing my brain was misfiring due to the late hour. She hadn't handed me a set of house rules to agree upon. She had handed me a chore list. She had just walked into my house at 11 o'clock at night, uninvited by me, and handed me a list of demands as if I were the newly hired live-in maid. I didn't yell. I didn't rip the paper up. I looked up from the list and looked directly at Graham. This was the exact moment our marriage cracked. This was the moment a husband was supposed to step forward, take the list out of his wife's hand, hand it back to his daughter, and say, "Absolutely not. You will respect Eloise in this house, or you will pack your bags and leave right now." I waited for Graham to speak. I waited for him to defend me. I waited for him to protect the boundaries of our marriage. Graham looked at the list in my hand. Then he looked at Vanessa. Then he looked at the floor again. He said absolutely nothing. He chose the path of least resistance. He chose to avoid a conflict with his daughter, even if it meant entirely, fundamentally humiliating his wife. A cold, terrifyingly sharp clarity washed over me. In that single moment of silence, I realized exactly where I stood in my own marriage. I was a convenience. I was an accessory. I was the polite, accommodating stepmother who was expected to swallow her pride and serve breakfast. If this were a reality television show, I would have screamed. I would have thrown their suitcases out the front door into the rose bushes. I would have demanded Graham choose between me or them right then and there. But I am 52 years old. I don't scream. I don't throw tantrums. I strategize. I looked at Vanessa. I smiled. A perfectly polite, flawless, terrifyingly empty smile. "Of course, Vanessa," I said softly, folding the list neatly and sliding it into the pocket of my robe. "I'll make sure everything is taken care of. The guest room is at the top of the stairs on the left. Good night." Vanessa smirked, clearly thrilled that she had established dominance so easily. She grabbed her suitcase and marched upstairs, Cole following obediently behind her. Graham finally looked at me, a pathetic, relieved sigh escaping his lips. He thought he had dodged a bullet. He thought I was just being my usual, accommodating self. "Thank you, Ellie," Graham whispered, trying to reach out and touch my arm. "I know this is a lot. You're amazing." I took a precise step back, avoiding his touch entirely. "I'm going to sleep in the guest bedroom on the first floor tonight, Graham," I said, my voice entirely devoid of emotion. "I have a lot to do tomorrow." I didn't wait for his response. I walked into the downstairs bedroom, locked the door, and turned on the light. I pulled the chore list out of my pocket. I placed it flat on the desk. I took out my phone and took a highly clear, perfectly lit photograph of the list. The timestamp on the photo read exactly 11:14 p.m. Then I opened the bottom drawer of the heavy oak desks, pulled out a thick, unmarked manila folder, placed the original physical list inside, and locked the drawer. The next morning, at exactly 5:30 a.m., I walked into the kitchen. I didn't make a mess. I didn't slam cabinets. I quietly, methodically prepared exactly what was on the list. I cracked organic eggs. I sliced fresh strawberries and melon. I brewed expensive, dark roast coffee. At exactly 6 a.m., Vanessa and Cole walked into the kitchen, dressed in their sharp corporate clothes. They sat at my kitchen island. I placed the plates in front of them. "Coffee is in the carafe," I said politely. Vanessa looked at the eggs, then looked at me, a deeply satisfied, arrogant smile spreading across her face. She thought she had completely broken me on the very first day. She thought she had established herself as the true matriarch of the house. "Thank you, Eloise," Vanessa said, picking up her fork. "This is acceptable." Graham walked into the kitchen 10 minutes later. He saw us sitting there, quietly eating breakfast. He let out a massive, visible sigh of relief. He poured himself a cup of coffee and kissed the top of my head. He thought everything was fine. He thought peace had been achieved. He had absolutely no idea that I had just quietly declared war. By the third day, the absolute, breathtaking entitlement of Vanessa and Cole became completely suffocating. They treated the house exactly like a full-service, all-inclusive luxury hotel, and they treated me like the invisible staff. Cole parked his massive SUV directly in the center of the driveway, forcing me to park my car on the street. When I politely asked him to move it, Vanessa immediately intervened. Dad said Cole could use that spot, Vanessa stated sharply, crossing her arms. His car is much more expensive than yours, Eloise. We don't want it getting scratched on the street, Dad said. That became the absolute mantra of the household. Every single time they overstepped a boundary, every single time they claimed a new space, they used those two words as an impenetrable, absolute shield. Dad said we could clear out the bottom 2 shelves of the pantry for Cole's protein powder. Dad said we could store these 6 boxes of winter clothes in the center of the garage. Dad said we could use the formal dining room as a temporary home office. And every single time they said it, Graham remained entirely, completely silent. He never corrected them. He never told them they needed to ask my permission. He simply let them slowly, methodically take over every single inch of the house. But what Vanessa and Cole didn't know, what Graham had conveniently forgotten in his desperate attempt to play the generous father, was the actual history of Maplewood House. This house didn't belong to Graham Mercer. Maplewood House was a massive, beautiful, highly valuable 5-bedroom colonial home sitting on 2 acres of pristine, manicured land. It had a wraparound porch, original hardwood floors, and a massive stone fireplace. And it had belonged to my parents, Harold and Clara Whitcomb, since 1979. I grew up in this house. I learned to ride a bike in the driveway. I did my homework at the exact kitchen island, where Vanessa was currently demanding organic eggs. When my mother, Clara, was diagnosed with early-onset dementia 12 years ago, my father realized he needed to severely, permanently protect the family assets. He hired a highly expensive, incredibly brilliant estate attorney to draft the Whitcomb family trust. The house, the land, and the significant financial accounts were transferred directly into the irrevocable trust. I was the sole trustee and the sole beneficiary. When my parents passed away, the house became entirely, legally mine. I paid the property taxes out of the trust. I paid for the massive roof replacement out of the trust. When Graham and I got married 18 years ago, we moved into the house because it was completely paid off and beautiful. But Graham was never put on the deed. He never contributed a single cent to the mortgage or the property taxes. In fact, during the estate planning, Graham had explicitly signed a legal acknowledgement, stating he understood the house was separate, protected trust property in which he held absolutely zero ownership interest. He was legally just a guest with a marriage certificate. On the 5th day of their occupation, the entitlement reached a new, deeply infuriating level. I was standing in the laundry room, sorting a massive pile of their dirty clothes. Vanessa walked in, holding a stack of perfectly good, slightly worn beige bath towels. She dropped them unceremoniously on top of the washing machine. "These towels are incredibly scratchy, Eloise," Vanessa complained, wrinkling her nose in disgust. "And beige doesn't match the aesthetic of the guest bathroom at all. Dad said you're going to Target today. We need 6 new sets of towels. Pure white, Egyptian cotton only. She didn't hand me money. She didn't offer to go herself. She was giving the maid a shopping list." I looked at the towels. I looked at Vanessa. "Of course." I smiled calmly. "Pure white. Egyptian cotton. Make sure you wash them before you fold them and put them in our bathroom," Vanessa added, turning to leave. "And remember, don't use fabric softener on Cole's gym shirts." As she walked down the hallway, her phone rang. I stood silently in the laundry room, listening as she answered it. "Hey, Jessica," Vanessa said loudly, her voice echoing in the quiet house. "Yeah, we finally moved out of that awful apartment. We're at Dad's house now. Yes, it's so much better. The house is huge, and Dad is letting us stay as long as we want. We basically have the entire 2nd floor to ourselves." "We're at Dad's house now," I took a deep breath. I didn't correct her. I wanted her to keep saying it. I wanted her to build her entire, arrogant reality on a completely fake foundation. That night, Graham finally came into the downstairs guest bedroom, where I had been sleeping for nearly a week. He sat on the edge of the bed, looking exhausted and deeply guilty. "Ellie, how long are you going to sleep down here?" Graham asked softly, rubbing his face. The bed upstairs is huge. There's plenty of room. Please come back. I closed my laptop and looked at him. Graham, I said, my voice quiet, completely lacking any anger. Did you tell Vanessa she could move into this house without consulting me? Graham sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. Ellie. She called me crying. The landlord was kicking them out. She was terrified. What was I supposed to do? Say no to my own daughter? You were supposed to say, let me speak to my wife, and we will figure something out together, I replied, my voice sharpening slightly. You are married to me, Graham. You don't get to unilaterally invite two adults to move into our home indefinitely. And you certainly don't get to stand there in absolute silence while your daughter hands your wife a chore list at 11 o'clock at night. The chore list was just, she's stressed, Ellie. Graham defended her, completely missing the point. She's very particular about her routine. It's just easier to humor her right now. It keeps the peace. She's family. Humoring her means turning me into the help, I stated coldly. It's my house too, Ellie, Graham finally snapped, a flash of defensive anger crossing his face. I live here. I pay the utility bills. I have a right to have my daughter stay in my house if she needs to. I stared at him in the dim light of the bedroom. It's my house too. He actually believed it. 18 years of living comfortably, rent-free, in a massive luxury home had completely erased the legal reality from his mind. He genuinely thought that because his clothes were in the closet, he possessed the authority to give the house away. I see, I said simply, opening my laptop again. Good night, Graham. He stood up, clearly frustrated that I wasn't arguing with him, and walked out, closing the door heavily behind him. The next morning, at exactly 9 a.m., while Vanessa and Cole were at work and Graham was at his office, I sat down at my desk and opened my bank accounts. For 18 years, Graham and I had maintained a joint checking account for groceries, utilities, and daily expenses. My salary from my consulting job and his salary from his management position were deposited directly into the joint account. I logged into my company's payroll portal. I immediately canceled the direct deposit to the joint account. I routed my entire salary to a private, heavily secured checking account completely in my name, linked directly to the Whitcomb Family Trust. Next, I logged into the joint account. I calculated exactly half of the remaining balance, the portion that was legally mine, and transferred it to the trust account. Then, I opened a new, encrypted email draft. I addressed the email to Marion Bellamy. Marion was the senior partner at the estate law firm that managed the Whitcomb Family Trust. She was a brilliant, incredibly sharp lawyer who had worked directly with my mother. She knew every single legal detail of my family's assets. Subject: unauthorized long-term occupants at Maplewood House. Dear Marion, I hope this email finds you well. I am writing to officially notify the trust that two adults, Vanessa Mercer and Cole Bennett, have moved into Maplewood House with the stated intention of a long-term, indefinite stay. They were verbally invited by Graham Mercer. I did not consent to this arrangement. As the sole trustee, I need to know the exact legal standing of these occupants regarding the trust property. Does Graham Mercer have the legal authority to grant open-ended residency to third parties without my explicit written consent? Host, please advise on the cleanest, most legally bulletproof method to terminate their occupancy. Best, Eloise Mercer. I hit send. The war wasn't going to be fought in the kitchen over organic eggs. It was going to be fought on paper with deeds, trusts, and certified mail, and I was going to win. Marion Bellamy replied to my email less than 2 hours later. The response was characteristically brief, incredibly precise, and legally devastating. Eloise, Graham Mercer possesses absolutely zero ownership interest, equity, or legal authority over Maplewood House. The property is held entirely within the Whitcomb Family Trust. The acknowledgement he signed 18 years ago explicitly waived any marital claim to the property. Legally, he cannot grant tenancy, residency, or occupancy to any third party. Only the trustee holds that authority. Do not change the locks. Do not throw their belongings out. Do not threaten them. If you want them removed legally and permanently, we must establish a paper trail proving they are unauthorized occupants refusing reasonable terms. I am drafting a temporary occupancy agreement. Do not let them pay for anything related to the house. I will call you at 4 p.m. Best. Mary and I read the email 3 times. Feeling a cold, deeply satisfying sense of control finally returned to me. The emotional chaos of the last week instantly evaporated, replaced by the sterile, absolute certainty of the law. Graham thought he was the generous patriarch. Vanessa thought she was the entitled heir. Neither of them realized they were just playing house on my property. At exactly 4 p.m., I walked into my home office. It was the room my father used to use as a study. It had rich mahogany bookshelves, a massive leather desk, and French doors that overlooked the expansive backyard. It was my sanctuary. I was just about to close the door to take Marion's call when Vanessa walked down the hallway, holding a laptop and a cup of expensive coffee. "Eloise, you need to clear out this room," Vanessa announced casually, not even looking up from her phone. She stepped into the office, looking critically at my father's antique desk. "Cole needs a quiet place to take his Zoom calls for work. The lighting in here is much better than the guest room. Just move your stuff into the basement or something." Dad said it would be fine. I stopped dead in my tracks. She wasn't asking. She was ordering me to evacuate my own workspace so her husband could have better lighting for his sales calls, entirely based on an imaginary permission granted by a man who didn't own the walls she was standing between. "No," I said simply, my voice completely flat. Vanessa stopped typing on her phone and looked up, genuinely shocked. It was the first time I had ever told her no in 18 years. "Excuse me?" Vanessa asked, her perfectly arched eyebrows drawing together in a furious, entitled scowl. "No," I repeated softly, holding her gaze with absolute, unyielding coldness. "This office is mine. Cole will not be taking Zoom calls in here. You will not be moving my things to the basement. You need to leave this room, Vanessa, and you need to close the door behind you. Are you serious right now?" Vanessa scoffed, crossing her arms defensively. "It's just a room, Eloise. Cole actually has a real job. He needs the space. I'm going to tell Dad you're being completely unreasonable." "Tell him whatever you want," I replied, entirely unbothered. "But get out of my office." Vanessa glared at me, her face flushing with anger. She spun around on her expensive heels and stormed out of the room, intentionally leaving the heavy wooden door wide open. I walked over, closed the door firmly, locked it, and sat down at my desk just as my phone began to ring. It was Marion. That evening, the tension in the house was palpable. The explosion finally happened in the laundry room. I was folding a load of my own clothes when Graham marched in. His face was red, his jaw tight. Vanessa had clearly delivered a highly dramatic, heavily weaponized version of the office interaction. "What the hell is wrong with you?" "Ellie?" Graham demanded, his voice rising, completely abandoning his usual calm demeanor. "Vanessa is upstairs crying. She said you practically screamed at her and locked her out of the office. Cole is trying to work on the edge of the guest bed. Why are you making this so difficult?" I slowly placed a folded towel into the laundry basket. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't match his chaotic, defensive energy. "I didn't scream, Graham," I said calmly. I simply told her that she could not commandeer my private office. "It's an extra room," Graham shouted, waving his hands in frustration. "They just need a little space to get on their feet. Why are you being so incredibly hostile? You've been acting like a martyr ever since they got here." I looked directly into his eyes, searching for the man I thought I had married. All I saw was a weak man desperately trying to avoid accountability by blaming me for his own massive overstep. "When exactly did you know they were losing their apartment, Graham?" I asked quietly, changing the trajectory of the argument entirely. Graham blinked, caught completely off guard by the question. He shifted his weight, suddenly looking incredibly uncomfortable. "What does that matter?" He deflected weakly. "How long did you know?" I repeated, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly precise, unyielding tone. "A few weeks," Graham finally muttered, looking away, staring at the washing machine. "Vanessa called me last month. They were having financial trouble. The landlord wouldn't renew the lease." "A month," I stated, letting the absolute betrayal hang heavily in the humid air of the laundry room. "You knew for a month that your adult daughter and her husband were facing eviction, and you didn't say a single word to your wife. You didn't ask for my input. You didn't ask if I was comfortable opening our home. You waited until 11 o'clock at night, when their bags were already packed and sitting on my front porch, to spring it on me. I knew you'd say no, Graham argued desperately, trying to justify the lie. You like your routine. I knew you wouldn't want them here. I had to make an executive decision for my family. I am your family, Graham, I replied softly, the words feeling incredibly heavy. But you didn't ask me to help your daughter. You didn't ask me to support her. I picked up the laundry basket. You volunteered me, I said, walking past him. You volunteered my time, my space, and my peace of mind, so you could play the hero without actually doing any of the work. Graham stood in the laundry room, entirely silent, completely unable to defend his actions. The entitlement of Vanessa and Cole didn't stop. In fact, after the office incident, Vanessa seemed determined to aggressively assert her dominance over the house, specifically targeting areas she knew I valued. On Friday evening, I came home from a long day at my consulting firm. The driveway was entirely blocked, not just by Cole's massive SUV, but by 3 other cars I didn't recognize. I parked on the street and walked up to the front door. I could hear loud music and laughter echoing from the back patio. I walked through the house, which was littered with half-empty wine glasses and expensive takeout boxes, and stepped out onto the patio. Vanessa and Cole were hosting a dinner party. 4 of their friends were sitting around my expensive outdoor dining table, drinking wine and laughing loudly. Vanessa looked up when I walked out. She didn't look embarrassed. She looked completely defiant. "Oh, hey, Eloise," Vanessa said loudly, ensuring all her friends heard her. "We decided to have a few people over to celebrate finally being settled. Hope you don't mind." One of her friends, a young woman wearing a deeply expensive designer dress, smiled at me politely. "Your house is absolutely gorgeous, Vanessa," the friend said, gesturing to the sprawling backyard and the massive stone fireplace. "I heard you guys moved into your dad's place. It's stunning." "Your dad's place?" I looked at Graham, who was standing near the outdoor grill, holding a pair of tongs. He looked incredibly nervous, staring at me with wide, pleading eyes, silently begging me not to cause a scene in front of the guests. "Thank you," Vanessa smiled smugly, sipping her wine. "Yeah, Dad's house is great. It's got so much history." I stood perfectly still on the patio. I looked at the wine glasses. I looked at the entitled smile on Vanessa's face. I looked at my husband, who was actively allowing his daughter to claim ownership of my family's legacy, simply to avoid an uncomfortable conversation. "It does have a lot of history," I said softly, my voice carrying clearly over the music. "My parents bought this house in 1979. I actually grew up in that bedroom upstairs." The friend blinked, slightly confused, looking between me and Vanessa. "Oh, I thought it was Mr. Mercer's house." Graham immediately panicked. He dropped the tongs on the grill with a loud clatter and rushed forward, desperately trying to shut the conversation down before the truth was entirely exposed. "Eloise," Graham said quickly, a sharp, deeply aggressive warning in his voice. "Can we not? Not tonight. We have guests. Can we not?" He was actually silencing me. He was actively commanding me to hide the truth about my own family home, in front of strangers, so his daughter wouldn't look foolish for lying. "Of course, Graham," I smiled, a cold, empty smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Enjoy your evening, everyone." I walked back inside, leaving them to their party. I didn't go to the guest bedroom. I walked straight into my locked office. I picked up my phone and called Marion Bellamy's direct line. "Marion," I said the absolute second she answered the phone. "I want them out. I want them out of my house, and I want it done legally, brutally, and permanently." "I was hoping you'd say that, Eloise," Marion replied, her voice filled with absolute, predatory legal satisfaction. "I have the paperwork ready. Come to my office tomorrow morning at 9. We are going to build an impenetrable paper trail." The next morning, I sat across from Marion in her massive, dark wood-paneled office downtown. Spread out across her massive mahogany desk was the entire legal architecture of my life. The original deed to Maplewood House, the highly complex trust transfer documents, the the property tax records spanning 4 decades. And right in the center, highlighted with a bright yellow marker, was a single, heavily notarized piece of paper. It was the acknowledgement document Graham had signed 18 years ago, 2 weeks before our wedding. "This is the kill shot, Eloise," Marian said, tapping the highlighted document with her expensive silver pen. Graham Mercer formally, legally acknowledged that Maplewood House is the sole property of the Whitcomb Family Trust, and he explicitly waived any and all rights to claim tenancy, equity, or ownership. He is, legally speaking, a permanent guest. He possesses exactly 0 authority to invite anyone to live on the premises. "So, what's the first step?" I asked, looking at the massive map of my legal leverage. "Do I just hand Vanessa this document and tell her to pack her bags?" "Absolutely not," Marian said sharply, leaning forward, her eyes incredibly serious. "Do not argue with her. Do not try to reason with her. Arrogant people do not respond to logic. They only respond to consequences. We need to create a flawless, undeniable legal record proving they are unauthorized occupants who are actively refusing reasonable terms." Marian pulled a fresh, crisp legal document from her printer and slid it across the desk toward me. "This," Marian explained, "is a temporary occupancy agreement. It is a highly restrictive, incredibly demanding contract. It explicitly states that Vanessa and Cole are guests, not tenants. It limits their stay to 30 days. It explicitly bans them from parking in the driveway, storing items in the garage, or hosting guests without 48 hours written notice. It also demands a $1,000 cleaning deposit." I looked at the document. It was completely, utterly insulting to someone who believed they owned the house. "She will never sign this," I said, looking up at Marian. "Exactly." Marian smiled, a cold, shark-like grin. "That is the entire point. I want her to refuse. I want her to reject reasonable terms of occupancy. When she refuses to sign, she legally changes her status from an invited guest to an unauthorized occupant. At that exact moment, we file the eviction notice with the county court." Marian handed me the document. "Go home, Eloise. Hand her the agreement. Make sure Graham is in the room. And whatever you do, do not lose your temper. Let them dig their own grave." I drove home, the legal contract sitting heavily on the passenger seat of my car. When I walked through the front door, the house was quiet. The dinner party guests were gone, leaving behind a massive mess in the kitchen. I found Vanessa in the living room. She was holding a tape measure, actively measuring the dimensions of my expensive, custom-made leather sofa. Cole was sitting in my favorite armchair, scrolling on his phone. "What are you doing, Vanessa?" I asked quietly, standing in the doorway. Vanessa didn't even look up. "Cole's mom is buying a new sectional couch for her house. We're going to take her old one. It's much bigger than this one. I'm just measuring to see if it will fit against the far wall once we move your sofa out to the garage." She was planning to throw my custom furniture into the garage to make room for a hand-me-down couch. Graham walked into the living room, holding a cup of coffee, looking incredibly tired. "Vanessa," I said, my voice entirely flat, completely devoid of anger. "You are not bringing a sectional into this house. You are not moving my furniture. You are guests." Vanessa finally looked up, her face twisting into a mask of pure, entitled outrage. She dropped the tape measure onto the floor. "Excuse me," Vanessa demanded, stepping toward me. "Guests? I am Graham's daughter. This is my father's house. We live here now. We are going to make it comfortable for us." I didn't argue. I didn't scream. I simply reached into my folder, pulled out the temporary occupancy agreement, and placed it calmly on the glass coffee table directly in front of her. "This is a temporary occupancy agreement," I stated clearly, ensuring Graham heard every single word. "It outlines the strict rules and boundaries for your stay in this house, including parking, guests, and a strict 30-day time limit. If you wish to remain on this property, you and Cole must sign it immediately." Vanessa stared at the legal document, as if I had just placed a live snake on the table. She looked at Graham, expecting him to immediately intervene and tear the paper up. Graham looked at the document, his face draining of all color. He knew exactly what it meant. He knew I had gone to a lawyer. "Ellie, what is this?" Graham whispered, panic finally edging into his voice. We don't need contracts. We're family. Sign the agreement, Vanessa, I repeated, completely ignoring Graham. Or pack your bags. Vanessa looked at me, a highly arrogant, deeply smug smile slowly spreading across her face. She genuinely believed she held all the power. She genuinely believed her father's imaginary authority protected her from a piece of paper. She reached down, picked up the occupancy agreement, and deliberately, dramatically tore it completely in half. Then, she tore the halves again, dropping the shredded pieces of paper onto the expensive rug. I am not signing anything, Eloise, Vanessa sneered, crossing her arms triumphantly. I don't answer to you. You are just my dad's wife. This is his house. If he wants me here, I stay. I looked at the shredded pieces of paper on the floor. I didn't scream. I didn't demand she pick them up. I smiled, a genuine, terrifyingly calm smile. Thank you, Vanessa, I said softly. I knelt down, carefully picked up the shredded pieces of the legal document, and placed them securely back into my folder. Graham, I said, standing up, and looking directly into my husband's terrified eyes, you should probably start looking for a lawyer. I walked out of the living room, went straight to the scanner in my office, and emailed the shredded document directly to Marion with a single subject line: refusal to sign. The legal countdown had officially begun. The first official, certified legal notice arrived via registered mail, exactly 48 hours after Vanessa had aggressively, arrogantly shredded the occupancy agreement. I was at work at my consulting firm, but I received the delivery confirmation notification on my phone. When I pulled into the driveway that evening, the atmosphere in the house was entirely different. The loud, entitled confidence had vanished, replaced by a tense, deeply defensive anger. Vanessa was standing in the kitchen, waving the thick, officially stamped legal document in Graham's face. "What is this, Dad?" Vanessa demanded, her voice shrill and furious. "I just had to sign for a certified letter from an estate attorney. It says we are unauthorized occupants and that we are officially refusing terms of residency. It's threatening eviction. Why is Eloise's lawyer sending me legal threats in your house?" Graham looked at the legal document, his face entirely pale. He knew exactly what it was, but he still couldn't bring himself to speak the truth. He was trapped between the legal reality he had ignored and the daughter he was desperately trying to appease. "Vanessa, just calm down," Graham mumbled weakly, running a hand over his face. "Eloise is just, she's upset. I'll talk to her. It's just a misunderstanding." I walked into the kitchen, placing my keys quietly on the counter. "It's not a misunderstanding, Vanessa," I said calmly, pouring myself a glass of water. "It is a formal, highly documented legal notification. You refuse to sign the occupancy agreement. Therefore, you do not have permission to be in this house." "You are trespassing." "Trespassing?" Vanessa scoffed, turning her fury onto me. Her face flushed red. "Are you insane? I am his daughter. This is his house. I am not a tenant, and I am certainly not a trespasser. You can't evict me from my own family's home." "If this is your family's home," I replied, my voice completely flat and incredibly precise, "then I highly suggest you ask your father to show you the deed." Vanessa paused. The absolute, unyielding certainty in my voice finally caused a tiny, almost imperceptible crack in her arrogant armor. She looked at Graham, her eyes searching for the reassurance she was used to getting. "Dad," Vanessa said, holding up the legal notice, tell her this is your house." Graham looked at his daughter. Then he looked at me. The silence in the kitchen stretched out, becoming incredibly heavy and deeply suffocating. He had the perfect opportunity to end the entire conflict. All he had to do was tell his daughter the absolute legal truth. "I don't own the house, Vanessa. I never have, but Graham was a coward." "We're a family, Eloise," Graham finally said, his voice pleading and pathetic. "We share everything. You're being completely unreasonable. Just drop the lawyer stuff, please." He hadn't claimed ownership, but he hadn't denied it either. He had maintained the lie through omission, perfectly preserving Vanessa's delusion. "The lawyer stuff stays, Graham," I said, walking out of the kitchen. "The second notice will arrive in 3 days." Over the next week, the house became an absolute evidence collection zone. I didn't engage in any further arguments. I didn't raise my voice. I simply documented every single infraction, every boundary they crossed, and every mess they made, building an impenetrable legal case. When Cole parked his SUV aggressively in the center of the driveway, completely blocking my access to the garage, I took a time-stamped photograph and emailed it to Marion. When Vanessa left a massive pile of expensive takeout containers on the custom mahogany dining table, staining the wood, I took a photograph and emailed it to Marion. When they invited friends over late on a Tuesday night, playing loud music on the patio until 1 a.m., completely ignoring the quiet hours mandated by the shredded occupancy agreement, I recorded the audio from my bedroom window and emailed it to Marion. I was building a flawless, undeniable portfolio proving they were highly disruptive, non-compliant, unauthorized occupants who were actively damaging the property. But the most effective tactic wasn't the photographs. It was the money. For the first week of their stay, I had continued my usual household routine, buying premium groceries and paying the massive utility bills. But after I separated my finances, the financial reality of supporting 4 adults suddenly crashed entirely onto Graham's shoulders. I stopped buying organic eggs. I stopped buying the expensive coffee Vanessa liked. I stopped paying the cable and high-speed internet bills out of the joint account, transferring them to my private secure network. Graham quickly realized that supporting his entitled daughter and her husband was incredibly expensive. On a Thursday evening, I found Graham sitting at the kitchen island, staring miserably at a stack of credit card bills. "Ellie, the grocery bill this week was over $600. Graham complained, rubbing his temples. "Vanessa and Cole are eating us out of house and home. And they turned the thermostat down to 65 degrees all day while we were at work. The electric bill is going to be astronomical." "That sounds like a significant financial burden, Graham," I replied calmly, cutting vegetables for a salad I intended to eat alone. "Well, aren't you going to transfer some money from your account to help cover it?" Graham asked, completely missing the absolute absurdity of his question. "No," I stated simply. Graham stared at me, genuinely shocked. "No? Eloise, we're married. We share expenses. We share expenses for our life together, Graham." I clarified, my voice cold and incredibly precise. "I am not financially subsidizing the massive luxury lifestyle of 2 highly entitled, uninvited adult squatters who actively refuse to sign basic house rules and who regularly disrespect me in my own home. You wanted them here. You pay for them." The second certified legal notice arrived exactly on schedule. This one was significantly more serious. It was a formal notice to quit, legally demanding they vacate the premises within 14 days or face formal eviction proceedings in county court. Vanessa was livid. The sheer arrogance that had defined her entire stay was now completely fueled by panic. She stormed into the living room, waving the new document, absolutely furious. "You are actively trying to destroy my family, Eloise," Vanessa screamed, entirely losing her polished composure. "You are a bitter, horrible stepmother. You've always hated me. You're just trying to drive a wedge between me and my dad." "I don't hate you, Vanessa," I replied, sitting calmly on the sofa, not even raising my voice. "I simply don't want you living in my house. You are a terrible house guest. You are incredibly rude, and you completely refuse to respect basic boundaries." "It is not your house," Vanessa shrieked, pointing a shaking finger directly at my face. "It is my dad's house. He pays for it. He maintains it. You're just trying to steal it from him." I looked at Graham, who was standing in the doorway, completely silent, watching his daughter scream at his wife. "Graham," I said quietly, "are you going to tell her the truth, or do you want a federal judge to do it for you?" Graham looked at the floor, completely terrified. He knew the absolute second he admitted the truth, he would completely lose his daughter's respect forever. He chose to remain silent. "She's bluffing, Vanessa." Cole suddenly interjected, stepping forward, trying to aggressively support his wife. He pointed at the legal notice. "This is just a scare tactic. My buddy is a real estate agent. He says if you've been living somewhere and receiving mail, you have squatter's rights. She can't just throw us out on Sisson Street. We have legal rights." I actually laughed, a short, sharp, deeply amused laugh. You think you have squatter's rights in a multi-million-dollar property held in a multi-generational, highly secured family trust? I asked, looking at Cole with absolute pity. You should ask your buddy, the real estate agent. What happens when unauthorized occupants actively destroy legal occupancy agreements on camera? I pointed to the small, incredibly discreet security camera mounted in the corner of the living room ceiling. Vanessa and Cole both looked up, their faces draining of color. I installed that 3 days ago, I lied smoothly. I hadn't installed a camera, but they were too panicked to know the difference. I have highly clear HD footage of you shredding the legal contract, Vanessa. That isn't establishing residency. That's establishing malicious non-compliance. The realization that they were completely outmatched finally began to settle in. 2 days later, the cracks in their united front began to show. I was working in my locked office when a quiet, hesitant knock echoed on the heavy mahogany door. "Eloise?" Cole's voice called out nervously. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" I unlocked the door and opened it. Cole was standing in the hallway, looking incredibly uncomfortable. The arrogant, bored salesman persona was entirely gone. He looked like a man who had suddenly realized he was standing on incredibly thin ice. "What do you want, Cole?" I asked sharply. I just wanted to apologize," Cole stammered, rubbing the back of his neck, "for the other day, and for parking in the driveway, and for the chore list Vanessa gave you. I told her it was a bad idea, but she was so stressed about the apartment." I stared at him, completely unimpressed. "You're apologizing now because you realized the legal notices aren't a bluff, Cole," I stated coldly. "You're apologizing because you don't want an official eviction on your public record, which would completely destroy your credit score and make it impossible for you to ever buy a house." Cole swallowed hard, his eyes dropping to the floor. I had hit the exact nail on the head. "Look, Eloise," Cole pleaded, his voice desperate. "We really thought Graham owned the house. He always talked about it like it was his. He said he bought the new roof. He said he remodeled the kitchen. We honestly thought we had permission to be here." "He didn't buy the new roof," I clarified, my voice entirely flat. "The Whitcomb Family Trust bought the new roof, and he didn't remodel the kitchen. I did with my inheritance. Graham has never spent a single cent on the structural integrity of this property. He lied to you to make himself look generous, and you were arrogant enough to believe him without asking to see a single piece of paper." Cole looked absolutely devastated. "Please don't file the eviction, Eloise," Cole begged. "We're looking for a new place. I swear, we just need a little more time." "You had time," I replied, closing the heavy wooden door. "Now you have a court date." 14 days passed. They didn't pack their bags. They didn't leave. Vanessa remained entirely convinced that because her father lived in the house, she was legally protected from eviction. Marion Bellamy filed the official, formal complaint for immediate eviction with the county court. Because we had an extensive, highly documented paper trail, proving they had aggressively refused the temporary occupancy agreement, and because they had absolutely no lease, the court granted an incredibly fast hearing date. The night before the hearing, the tension in the house was absolutely suffocating. I was packing my legal folder in the kitchen. Graham walked in, looking like he hadn't slept in a week. His face was gray, his eyes bloodshot. "Ellie, please," Graham said, his voice cracking, completely broken. "Don't do this tomorrow. Don't humiliate Vanessa in court. If you do this, I will lose my daughter forever." I stopped packing my folder. I looked at the man I had married 18 years ago. "You didn't want to lose your daughter, Graham," I said softly, the absolute tragedy of the situation finally hitting me. "But were you entirely willing to lose your wife?" Graham looked at me, tears welling in his eyes. He didn't have an answer, because the answer was yes. He had chosen the path of least resistance, and he had completely sacrificed our marriage to maintain a comfortable lie. "I'm protecting what's mine, Graham," I said, zipping the heavy leather folder shut, "because you completely failed to protect it for me." The next morning, we all drove to the county courthouse in separate cars. I arrived early and met Marion Bellamy outside the courtroom. She looked incredibly sharp, wearing a heavily tailored designer suit. carrying a massive legal binder filled with every single deed, tax record, and trust document proving my absolute, unyielding ownership of the property. "Are you ready to end this, Eloise?" Marion asked, her eyes fierce and ready for battle. "I've been ready for 3 weeks," I replied calmly. We walked into the courtroom. Vanessa and Cole were already sitting at the defendant's table. They looked nervous, but Vanessa was still desperately clinging to her arrogant composure. Graham was sitting in the gallery directly behind them, looking entirely defeated. The judge, a stern, older woman named Honorable Patel, walked into the courtroom and took her seat behind the bench. Case number 4489, Whitcomb Family Trust versus Vanessa Mercer and Cole Bennett, Judge Patel announced, looking down at her files. "This is an action for immediate eviction of unauthorized occupants. Ms. Bellamy, you represent the trust?" "Yes, Your Honor," Marion stated confidently, standing up. "My client, the sole trustee, is asking for an immediate order of removal. The defendants entered the property uninvited, explicitly refused to sign a reasonable occupancy agreement, and have ignored multiple certified notices to vacate." "I understand," Judge Patel nodded, turning her attention to Vanessa. "Miss Mercer, you are not represented by counsel today?" "I don't need a lawyer, Your Honor," Vanessa said, standing up, trying to project a highly confident, entirely dismissive attitude. "This whole thing is a complete misunderstanding. Eloise is just being vindictive. I am not an unauthorized occupant. I live in my father's house." Judge Patel looked at Vanessa, her expression entirely neutral. "Your father's house?" Judge Patel asked, flipping through the massive file Marion had provided. "Yes," Vanessa said proudly, pointing directly at Graham in the gallery. "My dad, Graham Mercer. He has lived in that house for 18 years. He pays the bills. He told my husband and me that we could move in when we lost our apartment lease. Eloise is just his wife. She can't evict me from my own family's property." Judge Patel paused. She looked at the incredibly detailed, highly complex trust documents in front of her. Then she looked up at the gallery. "Mr. Graham Mercer?" Judge Patel called out. Graham stood up slowly, looking completely terrified. "Yes, Your Honor," Graham muttered. "Please approach the bench," Judge Patel instructed. Graham walked slowly to the front of the courtroom, his head hung low, standing next to his deeply confident daughter. "Mr. Mercer," Judge Patel began, her voice carrying clearly through the silent courtroom. "Your daughter has testified that she moved into the property based entirely on your verbal authorization, operating under the assumption that you hold significant ownership rights." "Yes, Your Honor," Vanessa interjected smugly. "He told us we could." "Mercer, do not interrupt the court," Judge Patel snapped sharply, immediately silencing her. Judge Patel turned her stern gaze back to Graham. "Mr. Mercer," Judge Patel asked, asking the absolute, single most devastating question of the entire legal dispute. "Can you please produce any document, a deed, a mortgage statement, a trust certificate, or a formal lease agreement, showing that you possess any legal ownership or equity in Maplewood House?" The courtroom fell completely, absolutely silent. Vanessa looked at her father, a triumphant smile on her face, waiting for him to produce the magical document that would completely destroy my case and prove her entitlement was completely justified. Graham stood in front of the judge. He looked at Vanessa. Then he looked at me. He had nowhere left to hide. The lie was over. "No, Your Honor," Graham said, his voice cracking, barely more than a whisper. "Speak up, Mr. Mercer," Judge Patel commanded. "The court reporter needs to hear you." "No, Your Honor," Graham repeated, loudly this time, his face flushing dark red with profound, absolute humiliation. "I do not own the house. I have no equity in the property. I am not on the deed." Vanessa stared at her father, completely paralyzed. The arrogant, deeply entitled smile completely vanished from her face, replaced by pure, unadulterated shock. "Dad?" Vanessa whispered, her voice trembling. "What are you talking about? It's your house." "It's not, Vanessa," Graham admitted, tears welling in his eyes, completely destroying the illusion he had built for his daughter. "It belongs entirely to Eloise's family trust. I just didn't want to tell you no when you asked to move in." Vanessa physically stumbled backward, leaning heavily against the wooden defendant's table. In that single, devastating moment, her entire reality collapsed. The chore list she had confidently handed me at 11 o'clock at night. The arrogant demands for white towels. The refusal to sign the legal agreement. The screaming fits about her rights. It was all built on a massive, pathetic lie told by a cowardly father who was too terrified to set boundaries. Judge Patel didn't show an ounce of sympathy. She looked at Marion Bellamy. Mrs. Bellamy, I have reviewed the trust documents, the original property deed, and the signed marital acknowledgement explicitly waiving Mr. Mercer's rights to the property. Judge Patel stated efficiently. The chain of title is absolute. The defendants have absolutely no legal standing to occupy the premises. Judge Patel picked up her heavy wooden gavel. The court finds that Vanessa Mercer and Cole Bennett are unauthorized occupants, Judge Patel declared, her voice ringing with absolute finality. The petition for immediate eviction is granted. The defendants are ordered to vacate the premises entirely within 48 hours. If they fail to comply, the county sheriff is authorized to physically remove them and their belongings. She slammed the gavel down. Bang, it was over. The chore list was officially dead, and the deed had spoken. The 48-hour court-mandated deadline expired on a Thursday afternoon. I took the afternoon off from my consulting firm and drove home. I pulled into the driveway, expecting to see Vanessa and Cole frantically packing their cars. I expected them to be entirely gone. They weren't gone. Cole's massive SUV was still parked aggressively in the center of the driveway. The house was entirely silent. I unlocked the front door and walked inside. Vanessa was sitting on the living room sofa, my custom leather sofa that she had planned to throw in the garage, watching television. She was wearing expensive loungewear, drinking a glass of wine, and acting as if the catastrophic, deeply humiliating court hearing had simply been a bad dream. She looked up when I walked in, her face immediately twisting into a defensive scowl. "If you're here to gloat, Eloise, save it," Vanessa sneered, taking a sip of wine, desperately trying to maintain the arrogant facade that had completely shattered in the courtroom. "We are leaving. We found a small apartment across town, but we can't move until the weekend. Cole has to work. You'll just have to wait." She was still trying to dictate terms. She still genuinely believed she possessed some tiny shred of authority in my house. "I don't have to wait, Vanessa," I said calmly, standing in the doorway of the living room, checking my watch. The court order was absolute. You were required to vacate the premises by noon today. "So what?" Vanessa scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Are you going to drag me out by my hair? It's just 2 days, Eloise. Stop being so incredibly dramatic." Right on cue, exactly as Marion Bellamy had promised, the heavy, aggressive knock echoed on the front door. Vanessa frowned, setting her wineglass on the coffee table. She stood up and walked to the front door, pulling it open, clearly ready to yell at a delivery driver or a solicitor. Standing on the front porch were 2 massive, heavily armed deputies from the county sheriff's department. Marion Bellamy stood right behind them, holding the certified, judge-signed eviction order. "Vanessa Mercer?" the lead deputy asked, his voice entirely devoid of emotion, operating completely on official business. "Yes," Vanessa answered, her voice trembling slightly, the arrogance completely vanishing from her face. "We are here to execute a formal court-ordered eviction," the deputy stated clearly, handing her a copy of the judge's order. "You and Mr. Bennett have precisely 30 minutes to pack your essential belongings and vacate this property. Anything left behind will be placed in a commercial storage unit at your expense. If you refuse to leave voluntarily, you will be physically removed and arrested for criminal trespassing." Vanessa stared at the deputies in absolute, unadulterated horror. She looked at me, standing calmly in the foyer. She finally, truly understood that I wasn't bluffing. I hadn't been playing a game. I hadn't been waiting for Graham to save me. I had simply been methodically building the legal machine that was currently bulldozing her entire reality. 30 minutes, the deputy repeated sharply, stepping into the foyer, his hand resting casually on his utility belt. "Start packing now." The next half hour was an absolute, chaotic blur of sheer panic. Cole rushed out of the guest room, completely terrified by the presence of armed law enforcement in the house. He and Vanessa began frantically throwing clothes into garbage bags and cramming expensive shoes into their suitcases. They didn't have time to fold anything. They didn't have time to organize. They were actively fleeing a legal disaster. Graham arrived 20 minutes later. He had clearly received a frantic, hysterical phone call from Vanessa. He ran into the house, completely out of breath, looking absolutely devastated. He watched his daughter crying hysterically as she dragged a garbage bag full of silk blouses down the stairs. He watched the sheriff's deputies standing firmly in the foyer, monitoring the evacuation. He looked at me. "Ellie, please," Graham whispered, his voice completely broken. "They just need until the weekend. This is humiliating." "They had 14 days, Graham," I replied softly, my voice entirely flat. "They chose to test the boundaries. Now they are experiencing the consequences." At exactly 30 minutes, the deputies escorted Vanessa and Cole out of the front door. Vanessa stopped on the porch. She was holding a plastic garbage bag full of expensive shoes, her mascara running down her face. She looked back at me, standing calmly in the doorway of my beautiful, completely paid-off family home. The profound, breathtaking arrogance that had defined her entire stay was completely gone. "I shouldn't have given you that list," Vanessa whispered, her voice barely audible, the absolute humiliation finally forcing a genuine apology from her lips. I'm sorry, Eloise. "I accept your apology, Vanessa," I said quietly, completely sincere. "Goodbye." I closed the heavy front door, the lock clicking firmly into place. The house was incredibly quiet. The suffocating, deeply toxic energy that had completely consumed Maplewood House for nearly a month was entirely gone. Graham stood in the center of the foyer, looking completely lost. He had chosen the path of least resistance. He had actively lied to his daughter to maintain a false sense of authority, and he had completely sacrificed his wife to avoid an uncomfortable conversation. And in the end, he had lost absolutely everything. "Ellie," Graham said softly, walking slowly toward me, his eyes filled with profound regret. "I am so sorry. I completely messed this up. I should have defended you. I shouldn't have lied to her about the house. I was trying to keep the peace." "Peace without respect is not peace, Graham," I replied, my voice completely steady. "It is surrender, and I am entirely done surrendering." "Can we fix this?" Graham asked, a desperate, pathetic hope clinging to his voice. "We've been married for 18 years. We can go to counseling. We can work through this. I can change." I looked at the man I had spent almost 2 decades building a life with. I didn't hate him. I wasn't angry anymore. The anger had completely burned away, leaving only a cold, profound sense of clarity. "Not if fixing this means I have to forget what happened," I said softly, looking directly into his eyes. "You didn't just fail to defend me against the chore list, Graham. You stood in this exact foyer and completely sacrificed my dignity to protect your own ego. You were entirely willing to let your daughter turn me into the help in my own home. Simply so, you didn't have to admit you didn't own the property." I took a step back, the emotional distance between us now completely unbridgeable. "You gave away authority you never had," I stated with absolute finality. "So I let the deed speak for me. You can sleep in the guest room tonight, Graham. But I want you out of this house by Monday." Graham didn't argue. He knew it was over. He had broken the fundamental trust of the marriage, and he knew I was not the kind of woman who compromised on respect. 3 weeks later, the house was entirely mine again. Graham had moved into a small, relatively expensive rental apartment on the other side of town. Vanessa and Cole were living in a cramped one-bedroom apartment, completely stripped of their imagined luxury. I hired a highly rated professional painting crew to completely repaint the guest room, erasing every single trace of Vanessa's arrogant occupation. I moved my custom leather sofa back to the center of the living room. I restocked my kitchen with the food I liked, and I enjoyed my coffee in absolute, profound silence every morning. On a warm Sunday evening, I hosted a dinner party on my back patio. I invited my closest friends, the women I had known for decades, the women who respected my boundaries and valued my presence. We drank expensive wine, we laughed loudly, and we enjoyed the beautiful sunset over the massive, sprawling backyard of Maplewood House. I looked at the house. My house. The house my parents had built. The house I had fiercely protected. And the house I would continue to fiercely protect. Graham had thought he could give away my peace to satisfy his daughter's entitlement. He had severely, catastrophically underestimated the quiet, polite stepmother. He didn't realize that the quietest people are often the most observant. We don't scream when a boundary is crossed. We don't throw tantrums. We simply collect the paperwork, call the lawyer, and let the undeniable truth of the legal system utterly annihilate the lie. So, tell me honestly in the comments below. If your husband's highly entitled daughter showed up at your house at 11 o'clock at night with 4 suitcases, handed you a strict chore list like you were the leave-in maid, and claimed she was moving into her father's house, would you scream, rip up the list, and demand they leave immediately, creating a massive, highly emotional fight that your husband would inevitably blame you for? Or would you smile, make the morning coffee, quietly gather the security footage and the property deeds, and let a federal judge legally force your husband to admit he doesn't own a single brick of the house before the sheriff arrives to escort them off the property? Let me know. I read every single one.